So first things first, I wanted to thank Cholesterol Foundation for helping out with bringing Helen to speak for us today. With the current situation, everything that's going on in the environment, everywhere on campuses and everything, it's really important to listen to these types of stories and to hear what had happened and other history. So thank you all also for coming out and helping to, perpetuate that history. And also thank you to Dr. Cole and the Cultural Crossings for sponsoring the food. Helen Marks, let her introduce herself.
Well, that was as much of an introduction I think I need, except I tell people that I'm an endangered species. There are not too many of us who are Holocaust survivors who were actually in the thick of World War II, who are either still on this side of the ground or who are still capable or willing to speak. And I would like to thank you for coming because, as David said, these are hard times with all sorts of hatred, prejudice, racism, all sorts of horrible words that are floating around. And sometimes when I speak, I hope that I reach people to understand what hatred does and to make you familiar with what happened. Many of you, I think, have the historical Jewish background, so that you probably know a lot of the things I'm going to say, but I'm going to share what happened to me and some bits of historical information. First of all, I would like to say that speaking is a very interesting sort of thing because you don't know really what people get out of what you are saying. And I just hope that I reach some people. I am a voice. There were 1.5 million children who never had a chance to speak. I have. 6 million Jews and many more millions. At one time, it was thought that something like 12 million people died in World War II, but in more recent years, there was a French priest by the name of Father Desbois who did a lot of traveling in Eastern Europe and came across so many mass graves that no one had been aware of. And his deductions were that there were probably closer to 14 or 16 million people who were killed. Besides Jews, besides people who objected to what Hitler was doing, so political prisoners, there were gays, there were Jehovah's Witnesses, there were the Roma people, or as many of us call them, gypsies, and we don't even know how many of them because they were nomadic. There were so many people who were killed because of hatred. All that said, I'm going to tell you my story, which starts in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. I wasn't there. Yeah. My parents were born there in a small village. In Yiddish, it was called Drahiv, in Czech, Drahova, and in Hungarian, Kivisliget. The country changed hands at various times, and some of these countries were so small that if you went from one country to another, you'd better speak their language. And so people were multilingual, as were my parents. They each came from fairly large families. My father came from a family of 8 children. He was the youngest boy. He had a younger sister. Unfortunately, their mother died when he was only 9. His father was not exactly a warm and fuzzy person, but an older sister helped raise him. The other older siblings knew that they didn't have much of an opportunity in this little small town. And they had heard, because some people had come to America and came back with stories, they had heard that America, some of the streets were lined with gold. And not only that, it was certainly an interesting country because there were Indians running around everywhere. Whether any of this was accepted as truth, I'm not sure. They did not have cell phones and certainly not instant news, but my father's 5 older siblings decided to come to America in the early 1900s, 19-teens, 1920s. They came through Ellis Island. Some stayed in New York, some went to New Jersey, some Cleveland, and some went all the way out to California. That was my father's family. My mother's family, she was one of 10 children. She was the second oldest daughter who had the dubious distinction of being the second mommy because there were so many little kids in that house. There was always somebody attached to her skirt, and she did not have much of a life without an attachment to her skirt. After a while, she had enough, and she decided to leave. Her mother was very upset, but if she keeps popping out babies, somebody's got to take care of them. And my mother left to go to Belgium. Now, Belgium, as some of you know, is a dinky little country between France and Germany. What is unique about Belgium is that it has 2 languages. You've all heard of French, but then there's the Flemish language. The people who are in the Flemish-speaking areas, the Flamand people, are very, very proud of their heritage. When you go to museums and you see these gorgeous tapestries from the 1400s, 1600s, chances are those were made in the Flemish region. And the city was, as I said, the country was small. My mother went to Antwerp to live with her aunt, her Tante Sora, who was her mother's sister, and my mother learned to be a diamond cutter, which was a good profession. With war situations coming around, and young German soldiers running around, and prostitutes having very ugly underwear, she and her aunt were sewing lace and all kinds of pretty stuff on underwear, which got them all kinds of lovely food, which was not part of the usual salary. At any rate, this was not a propitious time in the world. September 1st, 1939, the Nazis invaded Poland. That was a pretty thorough invasion. November 9th, 1939, was Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht was, to some people, the beginning of the end. What had happened was a young Jewish man, his name was Herschel Grinspan, was very angry at how the Germans, or Nazis at the time, were treating the Jews, and he wanted to kill the German ambassador. And he went to the city hall or wherever, and no ambassador, so he killed somebody else. And he was, of course, taken in and interrogated, et cetera, but Hitler was looking to see if there was any feedback. Were there any objections to this? He was seeing that it was okay if a Jew was taken to jail or beaten or whatever. And so Kristallnacht, November 9th and 10th, the Germans, the Nazis, were basically let loose, and they were breaking the windows of Jewish stores and homes, looting. Supposedly 100 Jews were killed. And the German Jews could not understand this. They had been welcomed to Germany in the year 1000, 1100. They'd been thrown out of England in the 1300s. Thrown out of Spain and Portugal, the 14 and 1500s, but Germany had very willingly and happily invited them in, and they appreciated them. The Germans appreciated the Jewish doctors, the Jewish lawyers, the merchants, the goldsmiths, silversmiths, as well as what they were called Saracens at the time, Muslims. They were also good doctors because they did not follow the Christian laws. But here, they couldn't understand. They thought this was an anomaly, an aberration. Everything would go back to normal, and it would be fine. Of course, it wasn't, but a lot of the young German men decided this was time to get out. And many of them, when they came to America, They were welcomed at Fort Ritchie. I think that's in Maryland or near Maryland, because these young German men obviously spoke the language, they knew the customs. They ended up doing a great job interrogating the Nazi soldiers who were captured and getting information from them. Because here's another German, it's all palsy-walsy. So a lot of these young German, some of them were Jews, got a lot of information that was very helpful in World War II. At any rate, the events of Kristallnacht kept getting worse, and Hitler was seeing that nobody was going to stop him, as he saw that there were some people protesting what he was laying out as his dictates and commands. Those people have to be re-educated. They were going to be sent to re-education camps. Now, this is not exactly a concentration camp, a little nicer maybe, but they were sent there and they were going to be re-educated so that they accepted everything that the Nazis were handing out. In the hospitals, mental hospitals, physical hospitals, people who were not going to get better, they suddenly died. I mean, there were all kinds of terrible things that were happening. Hitler didn't want so-called defectives in the hospitals, and they were done away with. And so the situation was such that things were getting very uncomfortable for many reasons, and Hitler had decided that it was time to let people know that the situation in Germany after the First World War was not his fault, not their fault. After all, the Germans were the elite. They were the highest educated people. They were the most cultured people. They had all sorts of museums and universities. It wasn't their fault, but of course they needed a scapegoat. So whose fault was it? It was the Jews. They were responsible for all this. And so the propaganda started. Jews were vermin. They were lowlifes. They were not fit to breathe the air that the other Germans were fit to breathe. And this got worser and worser as time went on. After World War I, when Germany was brought to its knees because it lost the war and had to pay reparations, there was starvation. There was all kinds of horrible things. And if you wanted to buy a loaf of bread, you practically needed a wheelbarrow for the money in order to get it to the bakery. Inflation was horrible, and the situation was very bad for many people, and so they were willing to listen to a leader who explained things to them that it was the Jews' fault. And how was he going to take care of this? Well, Hitler had a plan that ended up being called the final solution. And my husband and I went to Germany a bunch of years ago because my son and his family was there. He was a vice president with a German pharmaceutical company, and he was there for several years. And we didn't care about seeing my son and his wife. I mean, we know what they look like, but they had our grandchildren. And so we figured we're going there, we'll take a tour. And we went to this beautiful villa in a place called Wannsee. And there, as you walked in this building, surrounded by beautiful flowers and fountains and all kinds of stuff, in the back of this museum on the wall, there were the 15 top Nazis. Not one of them was smiling. They were scary looking. And as I walked into this building, on the left side of the wall, there was a little wooden frame and some typing. You remember typing from the olden days? And it had all the countries in Europe listed alphabetically. Austria, Belgium, etc. And there was a number. And I didn't understand it. And then Belgium, 42,000. I had an aha moment. There were 42,000 Jews in Belgium. And how did we know this? When Hitler decided to implement his final solution, I don't know how I'm going to do this. If I start with you, you can pass it across. Everybody, we'll do that, okay. Everybody had to go to a city hall or whatever. This was a Judenregister. This is a copy of Nazi documents from the Belgian Museum of Displaced Jews. My father is on here, and number 9100. We were in Antwerp. My mother's 9101, and they're big on red pens. They must have had some teachers in there or something. Anyway, they had to have everything correct. And my father's name in Yiddish was Volt, translated into Hungarian, Farkas. So this is his, past that. And my mother's, she was 9101. She has at the top Jude, which is Jew in Flemish and in German, Juif in French. And for whatever reason, they always put the woman's name, her maiden name, even though my parents were married at this time. I had not quite hatched. I was not born till there's also a Star of David, in case people can't read. Thank you. And I hatched in 1941. For those of you who can do mental math, that makes me 39 3/4. Some of you do mental math better than others. Anyway, I did not have one of those. Belgium was invaded in 1942, and the Nazis came in the middle of a very hot August night, and they came to all the addresses that they had, and in the middle of the night, Juden raus, Jews out. And everybody was, the Jews had to pack a suitcase as they were going to be relocated. There were a lot of euphemisms which kind of settled people, although they didn't really know what they meant. Before my parents were separated, they told each other that were they to not be able to talk to each other directly, they would contact the warehouse person for whom my father was working. When my father came to Belgium, he and my mother were married October 29th, 1939. That was not a good year for anything. And at first, my father just worked as a laborer. He moved furniture. This man had a furniture warehouse, and stuff was stored there. Excuse me, my allergies are really bad. Anyway, after he learned to speak the language, he became, of all things, this nice farm boy, became a tailor. And then he even became a furrier. He made fur coats. So my mother was very happy when her husband made her a Persian lamb coat. That was really beautiful. And by this time, I was about 1.5 years, and I got my own coat, but I really didn't care. But at any rate, so before my parents were separated, they said that they would contact the warehouse person should they need a direct contact. My father and the bigger boys were taken in one direction by truck or train. And this is another copy of a Nazi document. It's a transport. My father on here is number 114, Farkas Solomon. His wife is Cezarine Slomovich, which that was her maiden name. And it gives his birthday and where he's from, and that he's going to be a Transportarbeiter. He is going to be an Arbeiter, a worker. Like hell, he was a worker. At first, he was taken to some of the concentration camp where he was a translator. To this day, various Germans cannot speak to each other because, unfortunately, their language is not the same. If we go to New York, we hear one accent. If we go down south, we hear another accent, but it's still the same language. In, I think it was 1871, Otto von Bismarck, the chancellor or premier, whatever he was, decided that all the little city-states that were ruled by princes or dukes or counts or whatever should emerge into one Germany. To this day, some of the people don't say they're German, they say they're Prussian or they're Bavarian or whatever. And so my father, who spoke at that time at least 6 or 7 languages, plus knew several dialects of German, was a translator, but for a very short time. From there, he was at Bergen-Belsen, he was at Buchenwald, and he ended up at the premier and worst awful concentration camp, Auschwitz. Auschwitz-Birkenau was where they killed more people. They sent them to gas chambers, they shot them, then they would send them to the crematorium. And this is a copy from the museum at Auschwitz-Birkenau. The gentleman there was happy to send me this form. It's got my father's name at the top, and it says Yud, that's his crime. He is Farkas Solomon, Israel. That was another one of his crimes listed. And it has all kinds of, he's in Antwerpen, he gives his parents' name. The one thing that I thought was the most interesting, well, there are 2 things. One, when he went in, he weighed 174 pounds. My father was about 5'9", I don't think he was 5'10", but he was solid muscle from having been working his whole life, very strong. So when he walked in, he was 174 pounds. 33 months later, when the war ended, he weighed 95 pounds. He was, as were the other prisoners, Musulman, skeleton people. They were just bones with skin over them. What was the other interesting thing? In all of the camps, they had to identify each of the prisoners. Auschwitz was the most adamant about being able to identify dead bodies as well as living bodies. And they first started off with a bunch of needles that was pushed into a person's chest, but not only was it a bloody mess, but people passed out and it was not very good. Then they came up with, on the inside, I'm not good with these things, on the inside of their left arm, they were tattooed with numbers. Now, it used to be in the Jewish religion before 1945 that if a person was tattooed or had piercings, they would not be allowed to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. After the war was over, they were allowed. And my father was number 70804. If you put a comma after the first O, he was a 70,804th prisoner to go into Auschwitz-Birkenau. There, he ended up digging for coal. Coal is a form of energy. They needed the energy, and they really worked those people without very much nutrition. In later years after the war, somebody was interested in knowing how many calories these prisoners got. The average person today needs 2,000 to 2,200 calories to remain healthy. In this study, they figured out that a prisoner, if he or she were lucky, they got 104 calories. Needless to say, people died of starvation, typhus, cholera, disease, and every other sort of thing. My father worked, as I said, digging coal, and one day, unfortunately, he broke his arm. Now, they had a hospital, but the hospital was not to see somebody get better. It was to staunch blood that was flowing or something like that. And periodically, with no warning, can I pass this one? Periodically, with no warning, the hospital would be emptied out, and all the people in the hospital were sent to the gas chamber, which my father knew. And he found a tin can, wrapped it around his arm, around the can. He went back to work. This went on for quite a while. The soldiers and Nazi soldiers were brutal because they could be, and I'm not going to go into that. But my father eventually reached the point where he'd had enough. Suicide is against all religions. It is believed that God should take somebody's life, nobody else. But my father was down to being a skeleton person. He didn't know if his wife and child had survived. He didn't know what was going to happen, and life was just too much to take anymore. And this is the only story I ever heard. I heard it from my mother. My father shared that with her. He never talked about anything that had happened, nothing. And the story goes that when he'd had enough, he decided that he would go near the electric fence that was around the concentration camp. Got to put this down. He had gotten this blanket. Where he got this, I don't know. I did write to the director of Auschwitz, Birkenau, and I said, where did my father get this blanket? Did they have it on their bunks? No, they had no blankets, no pillows. The only warmth they got was from the other bodies on the same bunk, and they were stacked 4 and 5 high. So where did he get this? The only thing that the director of that museum could come up with was possibly if he had worked for a short time in one of the storehouses where people had brought their suitcases, maybe there had been this blanket in there. That was one possibility. One of my daughters had a friend who went to Auschwitz, and she said that she saw where the Nazi soldiers stayed, there were bunks that had this blanket with blue stripes, and they had pillows. But that was where the soldiers stayed. At any rate, I don't know where the blanket came from. We joke and say it's not made in China. There's no tags on how to wash it, nothing. But he was going to walk near the electrified fence, throw this over his head, and keep walking. And he would be instantly electrocuted. Now, obviously, you can deduce if I have this blanket, that didn't happen. And the story is that he had a vision. He had an epiphany. He saw me as an adult woman underneath a chuppah. This is the only group I don't have to explain chuppah to. Underneath a chuppah, being married. And the last time he had seen me, I was a roly-poly little baby with a mop of black hair, not gray. I'm still kind of roly-poly, but, I was much shorter then. But he saw me getting married. And just to end this part, my father walked me down the aisle at Park Synagogue on July the 1st, 1962, when I was married there to my present husband, the only one I've had. And as I'm walking along, I'm feeling my arm is shaking, and I'm thinking, why is my arm shaking? My father was seeing his vision come to pass all those years later. And the irony was that my wedding was the first wedding after the war, and we had people from literally all over the world come because it was the first wedding. Nobody had had children during the war, or if they had, they died. And South America, Czechoslovakia, well, it wasn't Czechoslovakia, but Hungary, everywhere. We had people from Canada. I don't know how many hundreds of people were there, but it was quite a rejoicing. Anyway, my father survived, as you can guess, and he came back, and I will follow the rest of his story when I catch up with my mother's story. Well, he did go to see the warehouse person who told him that my mother and I had survived, even though the area where we had lived was totally destroyed, so he was reassured. Meanwhile, my mother and I were taken also by trains and trucks, and sometimes in those crowded conditions, some of the babies suffocated. And we were taken to the city of Malines in French, Mechelen in Flemish. If you ever go to Belgium, this is now one of those quaincy little towns with hanging flower baskets and cafes and all that cutesy stuff. But then it was where the head commander, Nazi commander, was there to see if any of the women or children could be used as labor. And women with babies and little children were not going to be used as any kind of labor. I think all of the people at that particular place were sent for extermination. My mother and I were there for 3 days, and a Nazi guard must have thought I was charming. He gave my mother a hard-boiled egg for me. We'd had no food or water for 3 days, and she pinched off little pieces for taste for the other children. And my mother was a short woman, shorter than I am, and she was wearing a nightgown, a bathrobe, and over that her fur coat, which is how we had left our apartment. And you would think that she would have walked in there very meek and submissive and almost begging. She walked in there with attitude. She was spitting mad. How dare he have her here? Her husband was working for the Nazis. Well, he was, but not willingly. And she would go to Antwerp and get papers to prove that. We had no such papers. And she went on and on that he should release her immediately along with her child because she should not be there. Somewhere along the way, my mother told me many years later that I was born lucky. In some kind of, do you guys know Bobamansa, Old Wives' Tale? If a child is born with the cap on its head or something, I don't know. That's considered lucky, and I was born that way. And so my mother said that because of me and my being lucky, the commander said, yes, you can leave. And my mother said, could she take one suitcase? This little woman, who's barely 5 feet tall, had taken 2 suitcases. We were not rich. We didn't have paintings or gold bars or anything at all. Sentimental stuff, some pictures, some candle holders, whatever. And we get out into the hot August of the day, and we get onto public transportation, and nobody approaches us because we look like crazy people wearing fur coats in the middle of August. And from then on, my mother and I were basically in hiding under bridges, in corners, wherever. My mother was dumpster diving before the word was even established. Nobody wanted to hide us because anybody caught hiding a Jew was shot on the spot, and we had no ration coupons, and we certainly did not have any papers that would made us, decent citizens. And this went on for several months, and my mother's only hope was to have her child survive. We stayed in the warehouse of the furniture person. There was no running water there. There was no heat. The only thing that kept us warm when it got really cold was feather quilts. But he didn't want us to stay there either because he was risking his life and his family. Meanwhile, my mother had a cousin who was Jewish. She had married an Italian, Hungarian non-Jew, and so she wasn't taken away. And the Hungarian person in America, I'm not going to go through all his names, it became Sam, which is nice and easy. He knew of a teaching hospital where they trained midwives, and he knew Sister Rose. And he asked Sister Rose if she would ask any of her young students if their parents would be able to take a Jewish child. And one of the young women there, her name was Gilberte Delfos. She was about 17, and she said she would go home. She stayed at the hospital during the week. She went home on weekends. And she asked her parents if they would take a Jewish child. They had never met a Jew. They certainly didn't know me, but they believed that war should not be made on children. And so my mother and I, again on public transportation, but not looking like stupid people wearing fur coats in August, we went to the small town of Hanu. It was a farming community, and we met Gabrielle and Gaston Delfos. And we had a major problem immediately. By this time, I was about 2 3/4. I was very verbal in Flemish. The Delfos family spoke French. We could not communicate. And my mother couldn't ask them anything, couldn't get reassurance that they would take good care of her child. She didn't explain anything to me. She just up and left. And she was the only person I knew. I had been with her my whole entire little life. I didn't know anybody else. But she dumped me. And however, I learned my first French word. Gabrielle took out food, put it on the table, and said, "Manger, manger." They knew we were starving. And I was very happy to manger. And that was my first French word. Years later, I asked Gilberte, I said, "So how long did it take me to learn French?" She said, "Every night that you did not speak French, Maman cried." So how long did it take? She said, "In 15 days, you were speaking pretty well." Well, a matter of have to, and I've been pretty good with languages. At any rate, here I am in a warm house with a warm bed, with people who are nice to me, with a dog even, and there's kittens in the barn and lambs out in the field, and this is a whole new world and no explanation why I'm here and what am I doing here. And so I made up my own story. The woman, Gabrielle, here we can pass these two around if you don't mind. Gabrielle, these are not the greatest pictures of them, but I couldn't find any. Gabrielle became ma maman, my mommy. Gaston, mon papa. Et Gilberte, ma sœur, my sister. She was my older sister, and the dog became mine. And the kittens were mine. The chickens I didn't like because when I tried to get eggs, they would peck at my hands. So I didn't like that part, but the rest of it I did. Life was not so easy because historically, Hitler wanted to invade England. He didn't have the opportunity, so he sent V-1 and V-2 rocket bombs. That didn't always make it across the channel. They got to Belgium, and so when we would hear, "Ee," you get to the side of a wall, get into a hole, arms overhead, and you hope that those bombs do not find you. Then one time, on the only paved road in the whole village, we saw the Nazi tanks coming, and Gaston said, "We have to hide." And so we went and hid in a cellar. Now, a cellar is not a basement. A cellar is a big hole in the ground where the farmers put their root vegetables. They line the dirt with straw, and they put potatoes and carrots and all that stuff on there, and there's a lid to that to keep it away from animals and such. We climbed into the cellar. Gaston took the lid, turned it upside down, and locked us in. And it was very dark in there. I still don't like dark places. And I think we just stopped breathing because we were so terrified. Of course, that's not possible, but it seemed that way. And then we heard a young soldier jump out of a tank and come walking near us. And he could not open the cellar because it was closed on the inside, and we hear him banging his gun against the lid. And thankfully, his commanding officer called him away because he did not want a drunk soldier. Till all the tanks pulled away, we sat there absolutely frozen, and it felt like years later we finally got out. Then another time, Gaston heard that the Nazis were coming through because they had heard that a lot of the farmers were hiding Jewish children, and they weren't going to allow that. And so again, there was a plan. And I did not know what the word picnic meant, but Gaston said we were going on a picnic. And, you know, whatever Gaston said was beautiful. I adored him. Gabrielle packed a big basket full of food, tied it on the back of the bicycle. I rode on the handlebars, and we rode to where he used to work. He was a typesetter in the small local newspaper. And we went down into the basement where we could turn on the lights, and we were there for 3 days. And I had a good time. Years later, I said to Gilberte, I said, you know, I don't remember ever knowing how not to read. And she said, you remember when you went with Papa to where he used to work? I said, yes. She said he had type. Yes. He taught you to read. So at 3 years and 3 months, I learned how to read, my only positive of World War II. At any rate, we managed to hang in there. And when my father left concentration camp, he came and stayed with the Delfosse family for a month. They had food. One of the neighbors, Louise van Koekelberg, also gave food. But meanwhile, there was still the problem of my mother. She was lucky that Gaston and a friend of his, who was a photographer in Antwerp, were able to steal, at the risk of their lives, an authentic paper. And they gave her the name of Bertha Legace. So this was a paper that would protect her to whatever extent the Nazis were willing to let her. And she stayed with the photographer and his wife and posed as their housekeeper. Now, over the time that I was with the Delfosse family, my mother was beside herself, not knowing how I was being treated. And 5 separate times she came to see me. The worst time was she actually crossed the worst battle of World War II, the Battle of the Bulge. I tell people it has nothing to do with Weight Watchers or anything like that. It was the bulge, the phalanx of the soldiers being pushed back. And I don't remember how many thousands of soldiers, both Allied and Axis, were killed. And she got caught. She was caught by the Allies, a Brit and a Canadian. Now, she did not speak French, nor did she speak English, and the English wanted to shoot her because obviously crossing battle lines, you had to be a spy. And the other one, well, you know, this is 1944. It's kind of tacky to shoot a woman. I mean, you know, get some politeness or something. Besides that, they figured she would be killed by flying bullets, and they let her go. And she came to Hanu, where I was, and I answered the door, and she was so excited to see me. And I looked at her and I said, tant pis, so what? I was not very pleased to see her. I was a little person. I did not understand that she had put me where I was safe. The story was that I was the child of cousins who lived in the city, and the bombers were bombing cities, not carrots and lambs and whatever. And but I did not understand that at that time. And meanwhile, she had hurt her knee, so she stayed there for a while. At any rate, we all survived and managed to get an apartment in Brussels, a two-room apartment. We shared a toilet with 5 families on that floor. And I went to l'École Catholique de Saint-Augustin. It was the only school that was not bombed. And when I had been with the Delphos family and they had passed me off as a child of cousins, they also gave me a cross and taught me Catholicism. And I was a very good Catholic, although I didn't understand any of it. I just did it by rote. And so when I went to St. Augustine's, I was terrified of the nuns. They were frightening. They did not let you breathe out of turn. You look straight ahead, don't turn your head. Frightening. And they made the most horrible soup with cooked celery, and I hate cooked celery. I had to figure out how to get it out of the bowl. Anyway, we survived, and I survived with the soup or not. And by 1947, my aunt and uncle, my father's sister and brother-in-law, sent us papers that they would sponsor us, no government support or pay or anything else. My aunt and uncle would take care of us, find us a place to live, a job, feed us, everything. And my mother knew that I loved the Delphos family and I did not want to leave them. And so she told me that we were only going for 2 weeks and then we would come back to Belgium. Now, having been in Saint-Augustin and knowing addition, subtraction, short division, and multiplication, I knew that it had taken us 11 days to cross the ocean, even though we had had a typhoon. And there were only 3 days left, so there was no way we would get back, and I spiked a fever. I was so upset. My mother had lied. Well, meanwhile, there were 3 nuns near us, and they gave my mother some aspirin, which I took, and otherwise we'd still be at Ellis Island, which actually has closed. Anyway, we came to America. I only spoke French. My mother and father could speak a bunch of languages, including Yiddish, but nobody believed that after not hearing from us for 4 years, that all 3 of us were still alive. So we visited relatives in New York, New Jersey, Cleveland, and went to California. And in 1949, my sister was born. And I said one time when I was speaking, she's the only Native American amongst us, and they thought I meant an Indian. No, she just was born in the United States, in Culver City, California. And my father now was having to support 4 people on the salary that he made as a shipping clerk in an RCA record factory. And by this time, the people in my mother's family who had survived, 2 sisters and 1 brother out of the 10 children, had come to Cleveland. So my uncle said, come to Cleveland and you can be a carpenter. So we came to Cleveland and we got an apartment and it had a bathroom. We were very excited because we didn't have a bathroom before. And my parents scrimped and saved, and they were able to buy a little bungalow in Shaker Heights, on one of the streets that Shaker keeps trying to give back to Cleveland, and Cleveland won't take. But I got to go to Shaker schools, which were excellent. I graduated. I went to college, went to Oberlin College, and 2 weeks after I graduated, I was married. You heard about that. And I started teaching after that. I taught in Cleveland schools and down on 73rd and Broadway, and it was very good. I enjoyed it. And My husband and I have 4 biological children, all of whom are older than I am. And they all have children who are almost older than I am. So I have 9 biological grandkids and a 10th who married my oldest grandson. And I have another one who's engaged, so I'm getting there. And 2 very large dogs who run our house. They're both over 100 pounds. They're giant breed. One's a Great Pyrenees who does what he wants when he wants to, not when we tell him. And the other one is part Newfie, part Bernese Mountain Dog, but mostly Energizer Bunny on steroids. And she's very quick. She has stolen 2 salamis, 1 pastrami, a grilled cheese sandwich, and a steak dinner. And she's always, on the eye. She's as tall as I am when she stands up, and she likes to look out the window that way. Anyway, and after this presentation, I tell people after you see something or hear something, I have a commercial message. 3 things that I would like you to take away from here. 1, know thyself. One of my daughters is a teacher in Pittsburgh, and she teaches a diversification course because she's realized as an educator that a lot of people who live in a community with like-minded people don't even realize that they are prejudiced. Prejudice is ugly. So is racism, bigotry, and all those hateful words. Know who you are, value yourself, and be the person you want to be. 2, Black Panthers were a little tough for me, but there was Eldridge Cleaver who said, if you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. Be part of the solution. And the 3rd comes from the Torah, Tikkun Olam, repair the world. That's a big job, but I keep saying if everybody does something to repair the world, it's going to be a heck of a lot better than it is now. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
Did you ever get to see your French family again?
Yes, Belgium. We've been back 6 times. My only regret is I never got to see Gaston. He died in 1961. I was in college. He'd had cancer, but survived the cancer and died of pneumonia. And Gabrielle, we finally were able to go to Belgium in 1987. And I had remembered her as she wasn't big or heavy, but she was a solid, fine woman. And here's this little woman sitting on a sofa. She looks like a little squishy apple with a white top knot. And she looks at me, and she says, la petite Hélène, the little Helen. This was 40 years later, and I was a heck of a lot bigger, but that she recognized me after almost 40 years was the greatest gift. And Gilbert, we saw her up till before COVID. That was the last time we went there. And she did not tell us that she was having heart problems, and she died 2 years ago. So my Belgian family is no more, and we went to the Netherlands and Belgium, and I had nobody to visit. That was tough. Any more questions? Yes.
Are they listed among the righteous Gentiles?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
In fact, my number 3 daughter.
Can you use my?
Oh, I'm sorry. My number 3 daughter went to Israel, and when she was there, she was allowed to plant a tree in their honor. And by the time they were recognized in person, Gabrielle wasn't able to travel, so somebody from the Israeli embassy came and recognized them. Their story is at Yad Vashem, at the U.S. Holocaust Museum, and at Steven Seagal's Show Up project. Yeah.
Do you know if your father was at the Yavorzna coal mine? Do you know the word Yavorzna?
I'm sorry?
Okay. My father was at Auschwitz-Birkenau as well, and the way he survived barely was he was a slave laborer in the coal mine in a place called Yavorzna, which was walking distance from Birkenau. I wondered if you knew if that was the name of where.
No, my father never talked about it, so I have no recollection at all.
And was he left to be discovered by the Russians when they liberated Auschwitz, or was he on the death march?
Actually, we're not quite sure. There was a rumor that he and a friend of his had escaped just before liberation, but we were never able to talk to him about it, that they were being walked to somewhere, and he and Sandik, that's all the name I know, hid under leaves and managed to make their way to wherever. But I don't know that that's the case, or that, they were liberated when everybody else was.
Thank you.
Sure. Any more questions? Sorry.
That's all right. There's some people watching online, and someone's wondering, did you ever get in touch with the girl you were playing with while you were with the Awesome family?
Oh, no. On the next time over, there were 3 girls. The youngest was my age. Couldn't stay very often because people's parents, were afraid for us to be out because they knew we were the bombs would drop. No, but when we felt us having moved from their house, I lost a little touch with her. Any more? Yes? Oh. Well, I think that,
Thank you.
Thank you.